Hey everyone! Today we're diving deep into one of the most dramatic moments in history, the 1857 rebellion. This is the story of how the British Empire, at the absolute peak of its power, was nearly brought to its knees by its own soldiers.
Just think about that for a second. An empire that seemed unstoppable, all-powerful, was brought to the very brink of collapse. It's an incredible story.
So, where does a fire like this even start? Well, it wasn't some grand master plan. It began with a spontaneous explosion of pure anger. The date is May 10th, 1857, in a military town called Meerut. And what's just staggering is the speed of it all. In a single afternoon, the Indian soldiers, the sepoys, they mutiny. They free 85 of their comrades who'd been locked up. By that evening, it's a full-blown uprising. They've seized the armory, they're attacking their British officers, and they're burning down everything that symbolizes British rule. And crucially, they cut the telegraph line to Delhi, so no one could send a warning. They marched through the night, and by the next morning, they're right there, standing at the gates of the Red Fort, the historic heart of power in India.
Now these guys weren't just an angry mob. They had a very clear grievance, and they knew they needed a leader. So they go straight to the last Mughal emperor, Bahadur Shah Zafar, and they lay it all out. They tell him, "The British are forcing us to use rifle cartridges greased with cow and pig fat." I mean, this was seen as a deliberate attack designed to break the religious faith of both Hindu and Muslim soldiers. They desperately needed a symbol to rally around, and the very reluctant emperor was their only real choice.
But here's the thing, and this is really important. This was never just about rifle cartridges. That was the spark. To really understand the fire, you have to look at the centuries' worth of fuel the British had been piling up all across Indian society. It all started with these policies that were, honestly, kind of genius in a really cynical way. Take the subsidiary alliance. On paper, it was sold as a protection deal. But in reality, it was a slow strangulation. Indian rulers were told, disband your army and pay us to protect you. It meant they effectively lost control of their money, their foreign policy, their entire future, all without a single shot being fired. And then you've got policies that were basically just theft, plain and simple. The doctrine of lapse just completely ignored the age-old Indian tradition of adopting an heir. If a ruler died without a son born to him, his kingdom was declared lapsed, and the British just took it. Just like that, states like Jhansi and Satara were swallowed up, leaving behind a trail of furious, dispossessed royal families. So you see, it wasn't just one group of people who were angry. This resentment was literally everywhere, at every single level of society. You had kings and nobles who'd lost all their power. You had farmers being crushed by insane taxes. You had landlords, called talukdars, losing land their families had held for centuries. And artisans were seeing their entire livelihoods disappear because of cheap British imports. It was this immense pressure, political, economic, and cultural, just building and building. And this is the moment, the exact moment the spark hits all that fuel we've been talking about. A low-caste worker taunts a high-caste Brahmin sepoy with this line, and it was so much more than an insult. For that sepoy, and for thousands like him, it was the confirmation of their absolute worst fear, that the British had a secret plan to destroy their caste, their religion, their entire way of life. That single rumor was all it took. All right, so from Meerut, this thing just catches fire. It spreads with terrifying speed, and what started as a soldier's mutiny explodes into a massive popular rebellion that engulfs North India. So once the fighting starts, you see these leaders pop up all over the place. And the one thing they all have in common? They all had a personal score to settle with the British. In Kanpur, you have Nana Sahib, furious because he was denied his father's pension. In Jhansi, the incredible Rani Lakshmibai leads the charge after her kingdom was just taken. In Awadh, Begum Hazrat Mahal fights for her exiled husband. And in Bihar, even an elderly landlord named Kunwar Singh takes up arms. For every single one of them, this was personal. But you know what really terrified the British? It was this incredible, unprecedented unity. It wasn't just one community fighting. It was a united front against the Farangi, the foreigners. Proclamations were issued in the names of both Hindus and Muslims. I mean, this was the empire's absolute worst nightmare. All the religious divisions they so often used to their advantage were suddenly gone, erased in the name of a common cause. Faced with the potential collapse of its most valuable territory, its crown jewel, the British Empire wasn't about to start negotiating. No, it responded with overwhelming, brutal, and calculated force. And their strategy was cold and methodical. First, they declare martial law,
which basically meant any British officer could execute any Indian on mere suspicion. Next, they bring in huge numbers of fresh troops from Britain. Then, the plan was to isolate and recapture the big rebel strongholds, one by one, starting with Delhi. And they paired all this military force with a classic divide-and-rule trick, promising land and rewards to any locals who would betray the rebels.
Look, the whole point of the suppression was to create terror. The message was unmistakable. There is only one punishment for rebellion, and that is death. Whole villages were burned to the ground. Rebels were hanged from trees for everyone to see. And in a particularly horrific practice, many were tied to the mouth of a cannon and literally blown to pieces. This wasn't just about winning a war. This was vengeance. So, after all the fighting stopped, after the embers finally cooled down, what was left? Well, what was left were two powerful, completely conflicting stories. Two memories that shape how we see this event even today. And the stories that emerged couldn't be more different. It's like two completely different realities. The British narrative called it the mutiny. To them, it was a barbaric betrayal by savage, ungrateful soldiers. Their victims were innocent martyrs, and the brutal crackdown was a totally justified response. But the Indian narrative, which grew stronger over time, called it the First War of Independence. It was framed as a heroic, unified struggle for freedom. Its leaders were celebrated as national heroes, and the whole event became a foundational moment for the long fight for independence that followed.
And you gotta understand, this fight wasn't just happening on the battlefield. It was a war of propaganda, a war of images. Back in Britain, you saw paintings and newspaper reports showing helpless English women and children under attack. The goal was to fuel public rage and make that brutal revenge seem necessary. Decades later, Indian nationalists fought back with their own art, creating these iconic images of leaders like Rani Lakshmi Bai on horseback, a warrior queen fighting for her homeland, a powerful symbol of resistance.
And that really brings us to the core of it, right? History is never just a list of facts. It's the story we choose to tell about those facts. And the words we use, mutiny, rebellion, war of independence, they aren't just labels. They define who the heroes are and who the villains are. They change everything. So I'll leave you with this question. What do you think? Which story is it?